John Fleming. You'll probably recognise me from seeing me in the club and my music production and the Euphoria's on my wall there, which I'm very, very proud of. And today I'm going to take you through how I made, well, myself and Digital Blonde, which you'll be aware that we've done lots of stuff together. Actually, we had our debut album on Euphoria 2 years ago, and we remade Jean-Michel Jarre's Oxygen. And I'm going to take you through the whole process of how we did this. And myself and Digital Blonde don't live close to one another, so we embrace technology to make this happen. He actually lives in Leicester, I'm down near Brighton, so it's about 200 odd miles. I'm John Fleming. You'll probably recognise me from seeing me in the club, working together to write the project together. We can only allocate a few days physically being together, and then we separate. I come back to my studio, he's still in his studio. We use technology together to carry on working on the project. And we both use Logic Pro on the Macs, because Logic Pro will only work on the Macs. And we use a Dropbox scenario as well, where we save the project sits in the Dropbox. So whenever one of us updates any part of the project, the Dropbox automatically updates itself on both ends, so I can just click and open the project, and whatever Ricky's done, there it is, and he bounces any new things he's written, and then vice versa. So that's as far as we get. And then when it comes to the geeky engineering part, as Ricky likes to call me, a messer, because I can't stop messing around, that's when I get really stuck into this part in the Juve recording studios. And I have to mention Ricky's studio, the mothership, as he likes to call it, in Leicester. So we're going to start off here. This is the project as I came back from Leicester. This was made in my laptop down here, and I've now opened it up in my Mac Pro, in the studio Mac. So this is basically how far we got. We wrote the basic idea. It's very difficult trying to recreate such a classic as Jean-Michel Jarre, because you got to try and recreate those sounds. It's a track you don't want to trash. That guy's done so much for electronic music. We didn't want it to be a project. It was just going to be absolutely trash, and everyone's going to think, oh my God, what have they done to such a good track? So we spent a lot of time recreating the sounds. So this is basically how far we got. It's got to be treated as a notepad. There's no engineering. There's very little processing at this stage. It's just kind of making the sounds, getting a rough idea of the arrangement. So you'll hear here. So you recognise the melody there. It's very, very basic, and this is how it all starts. You have to start somewhere, and you'll hear everything sounds a mess. Classic melody. Yeah. There it goes, and a second riff. And you'll see here. Here's the original. Just open this out. So that's how the original melody starts. There's the second riff. Alright, so the main thing we started here was getting the lead sounds and writing the original lead from Oxygen. So that was quite a difficult task in itself, trying to recreate the original sound. Our favourite synthesizer, actually, and it's a big lesson to learn for everyone. Everyone naturally thinks the more stuff you've got, the better you're going to create music, which is rubbish, because you're just confusing yourself. And we find the best thing to do is learn equipment that you've already got and utilise what you've got, like within Logic. And it's the same with Cubase and Ableton Live. The synths that are in there are fantastic, and the synth really is, it's just a sound. It either has 3 oscillators, 2 oscillators, 1 oscillator. It's just a tone, and from that one tone you can create multiple sounds from it. Like that one tone, it's like, as I'm speaking now, all the tones you hear in the natural world is just a tone. But from the one tone I can recreate a pad, you can make a bass line, you can make a kick, you can make a hats from that one tone. So I think the important thing is to learn synthesis, learn how synthesizers work, what they do, what the oscillator does, what the filters do, and then you'll be able to make the sounds that you want. People have got into the mindset now of just getting more and more plugins loaded with these candy amount of presets in there, but you're not making the sound for the space that you've got within your song. And that's what I learned from an early stage, and it's the best tool that I could have ever have learned, because when you've got a track, everything's fighting for space, and it's best to make your own sound to fit in that space rather than flicking through presets, because it's just pot luck. You could be flicking for hours and never find one that's going to fit identically in that space, and usually they've got lots of reverbs, delays, etc. to make them sound like a candy sound, and those current delays and reverbs on that preset are not necessarily going to fit in your track, because you should have everything sounding the same. You should realistically have, you know, the same reverb going through all the same sounds, so they all sit naturally together, not having, you know, 3 or 4 different reverbs, because it's going to sound unnatural, strange. Some things will stand out and other things won't sit in. So our favourite synth in Logic is the ES2. Here it is there, and we use that on a lot of tracks, pretty much throughout the whole track. It's always bass, leads. It's the first synth I want to turn to make sounds. And here it is here, I'll just solo it. There it is. Now Ricky has put lots of, as you can see, it's got a massive room delay on there, but I always calm it down. That's an ongoing battle between us. He spreads stuff with delays and reverbs, and I calm it down with the engineering part, so you can hear everything. But you'll see it's got three oscillators on this sound. Ricky actually made this. Ricky's very good at making sounds. I'll just get rid of the delay you'll hear. There it goes, and in the end, you'll see as the track progresses, I felt that one layer by itself wasn't enough, and I'll show you later on how I've laid it. I think there's about 4 layers with it all together, just to make it sound nice and thick and wide, and to fill the space which I felt it needed in the track. So there was more sounds added to that. I think there's one there also, which it's got 2 at the moment. It's more of a brassy sound, which was in the original one. So we kept nodding back to the original, trying to keep a bit of the original sound, but also bring it up to date. You know, it's got to sit into an electronic dance music track. So, you know, we felt, because remember that track's like 30 years old now, and you have to keep remembering this as you go along. So we didn't want to, if we recreated the exact original sound, it might sound a little bit dated in a modern track. So, you know, we had to bring it up to date and bring some kind of some electronic synthesis to it as well, so make it sound really nice and sparkly and dancey. So, okay, like I said earlier, this is just kind of like a notepad, and have to look at it like a notepad. It's not the finished, polished track. It's just literally, imagine me with a Scrabble notepad together, me and Ricky together, right, okay, we're going to write the melody. So we just put beats here as a background thing, so we've got something to work to. These don't end up as the official kick. We changed this, I changed the hats, I changed a lot of it, and it's just literally to get the core of the track down, to get the idea, to get the melodies and the strings. And from this, the track progressed. So we had the raw idea, and once it started coming together, we were happy with the sounds. That's when we start stripping things back, think, okay, to me, the way I work, I kind of look at the important thing of the track, and you know, it depends what it is. If you're working on a vocal track, to me that's the important part of the track, that you want to be the feature. It has to stand out, so you kind of build everything around that, so the vocal is going to come across, because if you put the vocal in last, it might be covered by other sounds, and you kind of got to make a gap for that vocal to sit in, which is harder. If you do it from the other way around, it's easier. So here the leads are the important thing. You know, that's the feature of the track. You know, everyone knows that oxygen melody. There's 2 key ones in there. So the way I worked with this track is to work on the melodies first, and then start building everything else around it. But with a dance track, predominantly the beats and the bass are very important too. So, you know, that's what drives the track. So I kind of did the leads, and then worked onto the beats, the percussion, to make it nice and sharp and punchy, and then put the rest of the stuff afterward, because a hell of a lot of stuff in this track you'll see at the end. I can't remember how many channels of tracks there are. I think it's about 60 or something ridiculous, you know, because we like to put lots of atmospheres, little trippy effects going on, so there was a lot in there. So in this for this specific track, the leads are important. These have to stand out, and you'll see what I mean with all this other stuff going on around it in the background. These leads have to drive the track. It's the things that you want to hear if you're in the car, the radio, especially in the club. You don't want it cluttered. You hear so many tracks, we've got these bits and pieces going on, and it covers the main part of the track, and people can't figure out, so, oh, how come I can't get my lead to cut across? And they turn it up. I mean, that's the biggest mistake ever. They turn things up or over-engineer things just to try and make a lead stand out. But the way I work, the way my brain works is work on the lead, get everything else to sit around it. I think you can't go wrong doing it that way. Okay, so we're a few stages on now. I think a lot of people are the same as me. Now, I think when I read articles or I read interviews on other producers, it's quite refreshing to hear that the same things happen to them as happen to yourself. Because when you work alone, you've got no one else to ask. You've got no one else to say, oh, do you go through this? Do you go for these problems? We all, as artists, go through mind blocks. I have terrible days sometimes. I come in here, I was playing loops in the watching them on the screen. Nothing comes out. I have terrible days. It could last for 2 days. I'm trying to do something, I can't get any ideas, no musical inspiration. I just have to close it, sit down, mope in front of the TV and be sad about it and want to give up music up. But this went on for about a year, this whole project, and we kind of felt this pressure because the original was such a classic track. It like frightened us in a little way, and usually I can pretty much make a track without thinking about it, so used to it now, years of doing it, but I had this added pressure with this track, so got to get it right. So it kind of ended up going on the back shelf while other projects had to be done, on deadlines. So through this process, I actually did one of the most frightening things ever, and I know it is for a lot of people, is changing the computer in mid-project. But it came to a point where I had to change the Mac, some of the latest plugins that I was getting are more processor hungry. The more you learn about engineering, the more tools that you use. So your computer's getting loaded at the end of each project, because the more you learn, the more detailed you get with processing. And I was finding I kept having to bounce things, so I was putting it off, and I had to get a new computer. So you're going to see the change again. This is kind of like the last days of the old Apple Mac G5 that I had, when I'm now on the Mac Pro. But here you'll see how the track's progressed. I've just found a channel here of the main lead, and you'll see down here it's just whacked with processing, and I think it does actually change again. We'll see it again later on. As I had more power, more tools, I was able to do more of the sound. But you'll hear here if I mute it. So we've got here. It's got a nice kind of phase effect on it now, which I've kind of felt it brought up today. And there's also the phase gave it a bit of width. When I felt it was sitting in the track, it just sounded in the middle and too thin. So now I want it nice and wide, taking up a lot of space, making it sound powerful. So here we're starting off with. I love the UAD pack. It's fantastic. It made me sell all my external compressors. It's so good. So I've started off with a compressor just to keep control of the volumes and keep the power of the synth. This is Ricky's EQ, which is calmed down. It's quite an aggressive EQ. Ricky, he's going to kill me for saying this, but he does get carried away. He's kind of like the old school way of producer, where he just does these crazy EQ band whips, and you can see it. There's far too much on the top end there, and I just wanted to show you this as an example, because you'll see later on how I've really detailed the engineering. But he's put a lot of bottom end on here. It shouldn't be there, because you want the bottom end for the bass, the kick, the bass. And Ricky's bad habit, he wants every track in solo to sound good and fat and big with bass, and he kind of forgets that all these big fat bass things, when you play them all together, you can't hear them. So Ricky, I know you're watching this. That's an example of a bad EQ, but you'll see how I've tidied it up. This is just to show you that things can be done the wrong way, and I want to show you how I resolve it later on, how I make it sound nice when there's going to be no bottom end, and how I make things fit together. So this was just to get it all sitting in here. Oh, you can see actually I've compensated for the bottom end with the Waves EQ. I've kind of cut it away, but still, with the original EQ setting, it's pushed so high in the wrong frequencies, especially where the hats are sitting. You get a nasty kind of brittleness to it, which again I'll resolve later on. I'm fighting there with a limiter, more EQ and a phaser. More EQ again, cutting that bottom end away. And it was like a battle really, because the original sounded nice even with the EQ, and the danger is your ears get used to that original sound, so when you change it, it doesn't sound like how you wanted it to. So I'm kind of showing as I go along the bad and how things get resolved. You also see on the track here I'm starting to organise things, all these lovely pretty colours, but for me visually I like to group things together. You've got the kick, the bass, which I like to keep together so I can understand, what these two things sitting together. Then I put the progressive section together. Then I've got all the leads coming up, and these are all the effects. We start doing all these effects, the details, the atmosphere. So now I'm getting a picture in my head how the track's going to come together, and I can look forward to start getting really into the engineering. So okay, this is what I know is the full bulk of the track. I've got to make all these sounds sit together. So again, this is kind of like the end of the notepad section. You can hear if I just unsolo this. Tracks coming together, got the beats, the progression, the bass line going on here. I know where the key changes are going in the bass. Hear the melodies working with the key changes, and we go into the middle 8 section there. There's the trumpet. So no, this is going to work in this section. And then back into the melody again now. So now I'm kind of got the whole song mapped out with some little bit of processing as I go along, and you can see there that the arrangement, the track is pretty much there, and that's how I'd work. That's the notepad, gone to the arrangement, it's gone to the near enough to final sounds, and once I know everything's there, I can start organising everything and get stuck into the processing, which I'll go into now. Okay, so we've progressed up onto the new Apple Mac Pro. The transition seemed to go pretty well. It opens up the old versions of the old projects. Okay, actually it didn't go too bad. The only painstaking thing was updating all the plugins that I've got, and it's probably a really important note to, yes, put them somewhere safe, but keep a record of all your login details, what versions you're running. I've got a nice Excel sheet which tells me what version I'm running last time I did the update, and it's a good job that I did that, because when I went through this process it was really easy doing everything. Yes, it took a day to do it, having to, because I was on a pre-Intel machine before, so obviously you've got to do all the software updates for them to work onto the Intel machine. But having this system in an Excel doc, yes, it's really geeky, but it was a godsend, and it would have taken me hours and hours and hours of painstaking work to try and figure it all out. So instantly I could go log in, look at the update section of that particular plugin, see what version is the latest version. I could quickly cross-reference on my Excel sheet, see yes, I'm a few behind, so I needed to update it. So I went through that process, and this made everything work pretty good. There were some plugins which are still not working on Intel for some reason. They're a little bit slow. Perhaps they've just forgotten about Mac machines and they just want to concentrate on PCs. I don't know. So there was a few missing, which you have to compensate and kind of find another plugin. And sometimes the case, when you listen again in fresh ears, you want to change your sound anyway, and sort of going through another plugin, you kind of find something better anyway. So where I've got to the track now, you'll see here still nicely labelled with all the colours, so I can see what's going on. I've got the rough arrangement before. You can see here I've got all the atmospheres. They're muted out at the moment because they're not so important at this stage. I've got the melodies. I've started laying some extra layers. I mean, there's no reason why I can add layers. I add many layers. You see here the main riff. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 layers to make the main riff. But they all work together. Make sure they all go together, that they're not phasing, you haven't got frequency clashes. That's the important thing. And I have made space for the layers. There might be some wide ones, and I've got some sitting in the middle as well. So the rest of the track is quite kind of sparse to make room for this big melody, because that's the important thing to me. That's the key feature of this track, is the main melody. Everyone knows that. Everyone watching this now will be humming it for the next few days. It's going to drive you mad. But that's the importance of this track. Sometimes I find if you've got a nice sound, it might be like a paddy sound, but it's playing a melody, as in the famous oxygen riff is like that. It can sound quite thin. There's nothing in the middle, and trying to make that one sound have something in the middle, you can just trash the original sound. It's a really difficult thing to do, and we spent a lot of time doing this. You know, it had this lovely kind of stringy sound, which is quite emotional, but we needed something thick in the middle. And when you're messing around with oscillators, you're just taking away the thin sound, and you want it to sit in the middle, but then you're taking away the width. So it's this ongoing battle. So this is where I bring layers into it, and I don't think there's anything wrong with layers. I love putting layers, but just be careful. You have to, you know, solo them. Make sure everything is going together. Have the clear vision in your head before you do these layers of what you want to achieve. Otherwise, you'll just be throwing stuff on top of the other, and then you're just covering stuff that you've already got. So you'll hear here. Here's a nice kind of stringy one. You can hear it's got a tail on it. It's quite stringy, a little bit brassy, but it's very thin. I've got them soloed as I'm going down. And you hear here, it's another kind of stringy one, but it's brighter. You hear the sharpness of the top end frequencies. So this is giving it a bit of dynamics, but sharpness to bring it more forwards in the mix. The other one's sitting back a bit, because of the brightness it sounds like it's closer. And here we have nice big thick brassy one. It's got the nice punch in the mid-range. It sits in the middle, so that sits nicely on top of those kind of stringy ones. Then we move down here. Completely different. It's like a whistly sound, but again, it's so different to the other sounds. It jumps across the spectrum range. The next one. Just a quirky little sound, and I made it by accident, but it just seemed to fit in really well. I did have it muted in the background for a while, but I added it to the rest of the melody. It just fitted so well, and I kind of progressed the melodies. When you first hear them in a 16 bar section, they kind of strip down, but as it builds to the last section, they're all going together. It just sounds really euphoric and punchy, and then we've got, come on, really wobbly one with a nice oscillator going wild and hitting of a frequency in the filter. And then we got quite a nasty one here. So I added like an arpeggiator to it. It's crunchy, it's driving, you can hear it. It's actually playing the melody, but it sounds like it's playing something else, but it just adds another dynamic layer to it. It gives a real punch and drive in the middle. And then the last one. Come on, catch up. We've got this mad oscillating thing going around and going into a filter which is catching, opening and shutting. It's just to add some kind of strange dynamics to it, and they just really work when I play them all together in solo. Oh, hang on, take the solo off. So I've played them all again solo. Big wall of sound. They all fit together. Just took a lot of work. It's like you have to shave little frequencies from each one just to make them fit together in the EQ range and also in the width. It's just a big, powerful sound coming out. But it's you know, the way I think of it as well when I'm making music, I think with these layers, some people are frightened to do these layers, but if you were to sit and watch a full piece orchestra in a theatre, you'd see this whole range of massive amount of brass section, massive amount of violins. Theoretically, they are doing all these layers, which I've done here, and they're doing hundreds of times more, but it works. You know, as long as you get all the pieces working together, it works, and that's how I think. You know, when I'm making music, I think, well, I need all these layers to make it sound powerful. If you just had one guy playing a trumpet in that big room, it would sound empty, but if you've got a whole brass section going with the strings playing the same part with another piece playing, it's just dynamic, and you know, it punches you get the goosebumps because it's so powerful. And this is the way I kind of think here, but be careful not to overdo it. You've got to know what space you're working with, and you know, if you've got a busy track in the background there, something like this won't work. So you know, every circumstance is different as you're making the track as you go along. for doing the main leads there, that big wall of sound, I can now tell what frequency I have left, what room I have for the kick and the bass and the percussion to sit. And as I've been making the oxygen melody, you'll see like the bottom end is shaved off to allow room for the kick and the bass. And the kick and the bass are those are the hardest things to put together, and even me, for all these years later, I still struggle with it. And it's really, really hard work. Your ears will slowly get used to it, because when you look at an analyzer, as in here, you'll see there, from just playing a loop here, that you can see there, that's just the beats going. They take up this range at the bottom end, and usually the kick and the bass will sit in that same frequency range. So it makes sense when you're playing two things in the same frequency, they're going to cover each other. And famously, all DJs will know, if you're not a DJ, but you've probably come across it, if you're playing two tracks, it's the same frequency, they start phasing and it just seems to disappear to nowhere. So this is what you've got to be careful of. So when I write a kick and the bass, generally I want them to punch in the same frequency, which is a really difficult thing to do, because like there you can hear the bass, I want it punching like the kick, so the kick is kind of acting like a bass note, so they're all working together. So I avoid putting the notes in the same place. That's the way I kind of get around it. And I try and control the tail of the kick. So like when the kick's going, you're going to get this tail. And you want to make sure that the tail's not crossing over with the first bass note. And that's where you just shave a little bit from the EQ. But generally my rule is I always avoid the bass notes with the kick. And I'll give you an example here. The kick naturally just sits on the first beat of every bar. And when you go to the, if I go to the bass here, you'll see here, the kick will be triggering here, and in between you got some space, and that's where I'm putting the bass notes. So the two are staying away from each other. It all depends on what track you're making. Here's quite a simple bass, because I don't want the bass to be going too crazy, because of I don't want that to be the main part of the track. If it's too busy underneath, you've got this nice melody of oxygen, and the two can take away from each other, because there's quite a lot going on this track. So the way I've dealt with the kick and the bass situation is by keeping them separate here. You'll hear there, the bass is going in between the kick. But also, you'll see here, I've got a nice compressor, which is pulling the bass to make it nice and tight. I'm trying to hang on to the tail of the bass so it's not affecting into the kick's tail. But you'll see here, and I'm a big fan of Logic's stuff, Logic's processing equipment. I use it a lot. I use the EQ a lot, and I do use external plugins as well. But for some reason, I just love the sound of Logic's. Here you'll see, I can see we're not at the end process. We're gonna get there, and I'll show you the last project. But throughout the track as you go along, I recall I wasn't too happy at this stage with the bass sound. I didn't think it sat in very well in the track, but you can hear how I've tried to process it. The main note and the punch of the bass I'm finding here, round about my labelling of EQ, I just grab anything and it's in the wrong place, but here we go, round about 124 Hz, I'm finding this is the punch of the bass. That's how I like my bass to sit in a track. Again, it all depends on what bass sound you're using. But I like to punch it, the bottom end of the mid. And here I've just tailed off a little bit, allowing the kick's tail, or the punch of the sub of the kick to breathe through. Shaving off the top end there, because you don't want it to clash with the track. It's just empty sound up there on the bass, and I'm shaving that off, just allowing room for the hi-hats and the top end of the track. As it stands here, I've added a compressor. I think I've actually used the limiter of the Logic here to just hang on to the bass, because there's some key changes in there. This is definitely not the finished product, because I remember I would have done a lot more processing on this. I'd have a nice thick channel, but I can show you as I'm going along. As you'll see at the later stage of the track, I mean, don't feel that something has to stay in the track. Like here, you'll probably see the difference. I do recall at a later stage, I remember changing the kick in the bass, and it's quite a dangerous thing to do, to start changing things at a later stage in the track, because you leave areas for these frequencies to sit, and then you're going to put completely different dynamics in the track, and suddenly things don't work together. But again, this is part of the process of making the track. You know, I'm happy we heard the leads sound really good, really in your face, bright, powerful. So I'm happy with that. So as part of the process of getting the other parts to fit round, you know, those leads, to make it sit underneath, happily sit underneath. So now here I've got the kick and the bass. It's an idea that I'm running with. I like the pattern of the bass, which is the important thing. That's what I like, the groove. It seems to fit, and it's not cluttering underneath of the melody. So I'm happy with that part. But I did think afterwards, okay, I'm not 100% happy with the sound of the kick and the bass. I just changed them, but not the MIDI parts. I've got a good percussion thing going here. It's got a nice groove going. It's not that I'm lazy. I just save things and put them in stock. When I spend a lot of time processing a hi-hat, I don't see the point of doing it in every single track. Sometimes it's all time depending, really, you know, because I'm so busy. I'm travelling, I'm flying here, there and everywhere. Sometimes when you come back, I could have done a weekend, just gone to Brazil for the weekend. I'm back on Monday, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, and I've only got a window of 3 or 4 days till I'm off again. So I keep things in stock. If I spend a lot of time processing a lovely hi-hat, what's the point of sitting there, spending a day processing some other hats again when you've already got them in stock? So I kind of recycle stuff, and I keep them in nicely organised in my hard drive with a section of nice open hats that I've done. This is over the years, and I find it saves a lot of time, you know. But it still is also important to experiment and try new patterns and new sounds, etc. But I have got such a whole range. Imagine I've been producing for like 15 years now. So I've got some great ones that I've processed over the time. So on this particular track, I've recycled some old percussion, and they happen to work well. But what I tend to do is some nice drum parts, etc. I do write them into the track. Everyone's kind of original. You hear with all my productions that the little drum parts, the little bongo fills, they're all original, and because I think they fit into the groove independently on each track, because whatever melodies you got, you know, I have to write that pattern to fit with whatever's going the rest of the track. So I might move stuff around, chop it, add another sound. And also importantly, which people completely forget when they're putting tracks together, if you've got a conga, a tom-tom, anything like that, they're in a certain key. And it's the same with a kick. So you've got to make sure that you retune those congas, etc., to the correct key of your track. So many people don't do that. And it kind of reminds me of a clock ticking, you know, tick-tock, tick-tock, how the pitch of that clock is going up and down, up and down. And if you listen carefully to some tracks, you can actually hear the percussion with different tuning. Like you might hear a hi-hat or something else, or a clap is going, there's different things, and it's actually going out of key. So remember to try and pull them in key, because it might be clashing with something else that's going in the track. That's really important, what a lot of people don't do. Sometimes you're lucky and it just works, but generally I'm quite anal about that, and make sure that they are in key with the rest of the track, or it'll work wherever my key changes are going, that everything will sit and naturally sound good. And another important thing, when you're doing percussive parts, like here, make sure, I'm going to zoom in the part here, see here, that's nice and tight at the beginning of the sample where I bounced it. Many people don't forget they might bounce something across, especially a later version, which I find that there was a lot of latency, like in the very early Macs, and it's not until you discover later you could have bounced it, thought that was okay, and you got a big chunk of latency, so not everything's hitting on the beat in time, and then your track sounds a bit of a mess because the loops, the percussion, any sample parts that you've got, they're all out of time. So just make sure it's nice and tight. But again, there can be fun in quantizing these audio samples that you've got of loops, just to give them a little quantize, so it's got a little bit of a swing to it, because sometimes it can sound too digital dynamic when everything's slap on the beat. It doesn't sound natural, the track can have no soul. So I often play around with the quantize once I've got the parts up here in the arrangement, just to re-quantize it, see how it sits and gives it a little bit of a swing. So it's also worth experimenting doing that, so don't just grab chunks and put them on there. And again, these old recycled parts that I've pre-processed, they can sound really good, different, in a different quantize with a swing. It just changes the sound of it. So also try experimenting like that, which I did with some of these. So you know, that it gives it a little bit of a groove, which you'll hear here when I play it. So here there's a groove going, some kind of congas going, etc. And I've actually added these here. You'll hear one here. A little one here. Dong, dong. That's just taken from a sample. I moved it around to make it fit in, and you're kind of making your own loop. And a lot of people, they throw loads of loops on top of each other, which is nothing wrong with that. But also make sure loops not covering each other. Like, you know, generally in loops you've got a clap. And I often edit the samples, you know, just mute out that section with a clap, because you've got your original clap in the track. And it might just completely cover it, and the frequencies, if you've got like 4 or 5 claps going, they might start phasing or sounding quite nasty with each other. So it's good to experiment chopping up loops like I have done here. You'll see there's 3 different loop sections there which I've chopped. I'll just expand it so you can see it. So like in this section here, you can see they're kind of talking to each other. That one triggers, this one answers it, then this one speaks to it afterwards, and it carries on. So instead of having a big chunk of loops going, that, you know, that could have been a loop there, and it's just a whole mess there. And you'll hear, if I solo them, see how they're talking to each other? So you get a nice groove going. If I mute the solo, the kick as well. Already, you know, there's 3 parts there, and it's got a bit of a groove going. But you'll see there, just another thing up that I'll mention. Don't get frightened to use non-percussive sounds. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, I have to go to a drum kit to make sounds, but you'll hear one's like a growl sound, the other one's like a crackle sound, and then you have got like a drum sound. But you'll hear they work together. So experiment with different, you know, different strange sounds, and get a percussive sound and put a distortion on it. But, you know, try with some weird and wacky plugins to make a really weird sound, but then add it to your track in a percussive way. And it adds a lot to the track, rather than just hunting through loops and loops. And, you know, here they're talking to each other, there's a groove going, and there's space for other stuff going on. Okay, we've brought ourselves bang up to date now. This is the actual finished project. As I said, from the previous arrangement, things changed. I wasn't happy with the kick and the bass. So here, I changed a lot. I did one of my famous things with a layer on top of the other bass, and sometimes, like, the negative point of doing a layer, you're just covering a problem. You're actually getting another sound. You're trying to, you have in your head, you're trying to make a specific sound, especially with a bass, because a bass it can work with a layer, but generally should just be a strong, punchy sound. And I sometimes do the danger of adding layers to a bass, because I'm trying to make the top end of the bass more twangy. I'm trying to make it come across, and I just end up masking too many other things. And it's quite dangerous with a bass, because, you know, you've got these low end frequencies which are wobbling around, and you just end up with this whole wobbling mess. So I changed the kick in the bass. I think that was important, and you can see I've done some quite heavy processing. Okay, so I've got my new kick in place. It's from my ES24 sampler. It's actually a kick that I used in the track, the Muse remix that I did with Wizzy Noise, and that was in Pro 1 as well. It's just one of my favourite kicks. It's just a nice, tight, punchy kick with not a big tail on it. But it's only, you can control the tail to a degree in the sampler here with the release here. You see I've pretty much got no release on the sampler. So when it triggers, it punches, it kicks, poof, it disappears, allowing for the bass to to do its thing. And again, the bass is a nice tight punchy sound. So you got punch, kick, bang bang in between with the bass line back to the kick. It's quite a fast tempo track. It's 135 BPM. If it was a slow track, 120 BPM, you could allow the tail of the kick and the basses to breathe. But it's quite a fast tempo track, so you want these things to hit, disappear, make room for the rest of the stuff. And this is actually quite slow. Usually I do 140 BPM, so you really have to address those problems on the faster tracks. So you've got this long tail kicking, you've got a fast bass line in between, it just gets messy. So here, here's a sampler, nice short envelope. Everything's hitting fast because I want it to. I just like the sound of the ES24. I could grab the sample itself and throw it as an audio chunk, but I find I have a little bit more control using the sampler. Now I can change certain things like the filter range, how it attacks. I can repitch it if need be, which you can see I've done here. I've moved it. I've done some fine tuning and I've moved it up one semitone. Again, this is to tune it to the track, and you can use various after-tune plugins, you know, to do this, but I find they don't do them very well. I've tried various ways. I don't know, I think it adds something to adds some wrong kind of colour to the actual sample. Well, all the ones that I've tried, maybe I need to try more to correct this, but I find in the sampler, but everything in the sampler, when you're repitching, retuning stuff, it does it precisely, it does it very, very well. So, instantly with the kick, one of my favourite UAD compressors, the Teletronics. Very, very good at, I find, with kick and bass, both kick and bass. It's just so simple to use, you know, you've only got three controls on here. And you'll see here the peak reduction is to 20, so it's hitting it quite hard. It's allowing the kick to come through and it's just pulling it, you know, any volumes going ahead, above the settings that I've got here, it's just pulling them down, making the kick nice and tight. I'm trying to explain this in layman's terms because if I get too technical I lose people, and I've been told off for this in the past, so excuse me stalling and stuttering. EQ wise, if I can grab it. Okay, you can see here round about 5k was 4,350 hertz. That's the top of the kick. It's where, imagine a drummer's playing a kick drum, which everyone forgets with samples. You've got to picture this live aspect. It's when a stick actually hits the skin of the kick, that's the top end that you're going to hear. It's not just all about the punch and the bottom end. You've got to remember that part where he's hitting the top of the drum, it's got the click, that's the thing that's punching through. That's the thing you're going to hear when you're in the real world, or when people listen to tracks. If you've got these tiny little speakers here, which are used for cross monitoring, that in the real world, that's what people are listening to tracks on. This is computer speakers. They're listening in shops on these tiny little speakers. If you don't emphasise this part of the kick, you're not going to hear it. You know, not all these speakers, they won't pick up the bottom end of the kick very well. So always remember to emphasise that top end of the kick, and it'll make wonders for the kick cutting through. And it's important, if you've got a lot going on in the track, to make room for that kick to come through as well. You know, a lot of percussive sounds maybe covering that part of the kick, so it's important to make sure you leave a little bit of space, make space for everything, so you can actually hear the top part, the dynamics of that kick coming through. I had a problem frequency around about here. I could hear like a whistling frequency, which I killed. I did a dynamic cut to get rid of it. I've given it a little bit of a boost here at see, I used my EQs all around and the wrong way. There we go, at 82 hertz, which I felt, which was the more punchy dynamic part of the kick. And I've just tailed off a little bit at the bottom end there, just for the to allow the bass to come through if they do cross frequencies. I can't remember what's on his second EQ, so I'm just going to have a look. Oh, it's just some extra little boost. And then another favourite tool of mine is UAD's precision limiter, and the reason I've used that, there's some steps in the kick, there might be some little rolls, some little steps, and you generally, when you find out the volume of the kick will jump up, and I just find that limiter just manages to hold them back, keeps them all the same level. You're not getting any, when you get kick rolls, etc., volume's not jumping out like crazy. That's pretty much it. The original sample is such a good kick, it didn't really need too much work on it. I've just done this fine tuning just to make it sit into this mix, and it punches and it works very, very well. But the danger is to over process things. I've been guilty of this. Sometimes you think, oh, I have to process, I have to put lots of stuff on there to make it sound good, but the danger is you can overdo it, you can kill a sound. An EQ is a very special tool. If it's used wrongly, you can kill a sound. You think you might be doing something just because you read somewhere, oh, you need to kill certain frequency to get rid of muddiness, yes, do it. Take a dip at that frequency, cut away, but also make sure that you're not killing the original sound. Have the vision in your head what you want the sound to be like, and if you're making a cut and it's killing the sound, it doesn't need to be killed there, you know. And also, a big mistake what people do, they'll solo the track when they're EQing a track, and they'll make it sound exactly how they want when it's soloed, but as soon as they unsolo it and the rest of the track, it's not going to fit. So I kind of find, yes, do that, so you can kind of get a little bit more detailed what you want to do, but also put it back into the mix and do those cuts, do those changes while it's in the mix to make sure it's going to sit in the mix. Because if you do some dynamic cuts, it might sound lovely in the track. You know, you might cut away a lot of the bottom ends, and it sits wonderfully in the mix. But when you solo it, it sounds really weird and tinny and awful. But if it's working in the mix and you've cut away those frequencies, leave it. It works. You don't have to make a sound glorious, fat and big soloed, because it won't work. You know, you have to do it in the mix. Make sure it's sitting in the mix. Cut those parts so everything's slotting together in the mix. So now we're going to go to the bass where it says new bass. Again, I've used actually it's very rare because I usually use the ES2, and I've used the sounds in the ES24. It's like a sample library of some basses that I got. What's wrong with using sample libraries? But again, it's totally making that sound to fit into your track. I just love this bass seemed to work. I did go through the ES2, and I came across this by accident, just recalling what sounds I've used in the past. I thought, I haven't used this for a while, so it's quite refreshing to use this sound again. It's a nice punchy bass, and it just seemed to work. It was kind of a little bit like one of those fluke things. I was flicking through sounds trying to find basses, just remembering old kind of sounds that I use, and I came across it by accident thinking, what's this? And it just jumped out and seemed to sit in the track. So I was like, oh, it saves me making the bass, because quite often I'll sit there with a synthesizer and make the bass to go into the track. So this happened to be a lucky fluke. So, but we have to make it work in the track. Just the sample by itself just doesn't magically work. You have to do some work to make it sit in there. So I'll show you what plugs I used on this one. So I instantly started off with a little bit of EQ to give a slight boost at 5K. What I've done here is I like to add EQs after I've done compressing, because if you start messing around with EQs and you've got a compressor afterwards, then you've completely messed up all your settings on your compressor. You might be boosting a frequency and then the compressor's putting too much down. But what they generally call these type of plugins, this is a UAD package, is a remodeling plugin. They're generally kind of, they've listened to the dynamics of the original and they've tried to recreate this in a software form. So every EQ, especially these remodeling ones, and there's thousands of them out there, they add a little bit of colour to the sound. And quite often what I would do is just open up the EQ and not touch anything, because it's adding something different. It's adding different colour, it's adding perhaps a little bit of whip, or just adding something. And this is where I go back to the beginning. Don't get too many plugins, because you just get lost. And the beauty is of not going crazy, because I haven't got that many, but not having that many, I get to know each individual plugin. So if, like this the original bass sound, I needed to add this certain type of dynamics and colour to it, and I knew instantly the Pultec EQ would do this to the sound. So instantly my ears told me, oh, I know what EQ to add up. The Cambridge compressor does the same thing. The Waves plugins, even the Logic EQ, they all have their different dynamics of how they work. So again, this is such an important tool when you're making music, because if you've got too many EQs, you won't get to learn them. You won't. It takes a while to open up the EQ and know what it instantly does to the sound. So me having a few, I know exactly. I can hear in my head, I want this to have this certain colour, so I know exactly where to reach just to add this colour. So this is why I've gone for the Pultec UAD, and I've just given it a little boost around about 5K, which is where I think the punch of the bass is where you get the twang of the bass. So I've just added a little bit here. And I've gone again to the trusty old favourite, the Teletronics compressor, because with basses you want them tight, punchy and in your face, especially my tracks. for me, I want to hear the bass really punching through. It's such an important part of the track. You know, every music style is different. Some basses are quite low, subbeat, or sit underneath. But for me, the dance music, I want it in the same punch range as a kick. I want to act, you know, it should be acting like another kick to me. So that really drives the track along. So here's I've then grabbed for the my trusty Logic EQ, and you can see here I made a couple of little dips here. One I'll just highlight it there. At 290 hertz, I feel there was like perhaps a little bit of a muddy area, which I just needed to get rid of, because within all the frequency range that seems to cross over with all sounds, it could be the leads, the hats, loops, everything is round about this kind of from 200 to 500 area. They nickname it the muddy area, and just because all these sounds seem to cross at this point, so just make sure if you know, I'll make a cut at that point. If it's not killing a sound, it's not damaging the sound, I'm just going to get rid of it, just to leave room for all these parts that are crossing over. And it really does work at the end of the track. You hear a lot of mastering engineers who all say, oh, there's so much mud in that area. So if I just get in the habit of doing it, just listening, cut it there. Is it doing any damage to the sound? Listen very carefully. It's not good. I've eliminated it. And that's what I generally kind of deal with through all the sounds, because I know all these sounds, these frequencies, all these sounds are crossing over at this area here. So there's a nice little cut there. And also what I've done here at 82, if you remember back to the kick, there was a little boost round about that area. I've just cut that area there just in case there's a little bit of tail of the kick. You know, those areas can just cross over slightly, though I've avoided it with the MIDI notes, but I've just made a little cut there to allow the kick, if we do get to a situation where there's like you know, it's just crossed over a little bit, at least the two can sit more comfortably together. Last on the bass there, I've made a cut at 24 hertz. I just naturally do this where I've had mastering guys tell me that this frequency is not relevant in the clubs, it's kind of like a dead area, so I just got in a habit of cutting it. The reason's been, when you get told something, you believe it, so I've gone with it, and it seems to work for me. So it's again, it's these things that you pick up as you go along. Okay, we looked earlier at the stage before where I showed you the percussion parts, which are cut up to speak to each other. I found it had a little bit more room, so I've added some more, and you'll see here there's quite a lot more. There's the original ones. I've nicely colour coded them now. Let me just screen this. So there's the original ones that we did, a little growling one. I've actually moved them around here because I've added some tom-toms, and you'll see here none of them are triggering at the same time. These drums are actually talking to each other, and there's some other little sounds here. So there's some really nice percussive moments going on within the track. You'll hear in the finished track as well how they all talk to each other. There's room for each other, and it just gives the whole thing a nice groove instead of what people usually do, just get a big old dirty loop. It's just noise, there's no groove to it. You know, you want the track to have some soul. So you'll hear here all these little noises going on, the fizzle noise, and again I like experimenting with some weird and wonderful sounds, just get them talking to each other. So those are important things. So it's got a nice groove with just some strange sounds going on. You know, they're doing percussive sounds, so I think it's important to experiment, you know, with things like this, because you can get some interesting sounds. It gives the track a kind of a different dynamic as well, rather than like the usual percussive sounds. Okay, so we're going to move on to the percussive parts. We've as in like the hi-hats, the high frequency range. Haven't gone too mad. I'm not a fan of layering with too many loops. I say being a layering man, but with percussive stuff, it can just sound too much of a wall of sound, which you don't want with percussive sounds. You want them to be sharp, bright, dynamic, and hear what they're doing. If you start layering stuff too much, you don't hear properly what the sounds are doing. So you know, when you got a hi-hat, you want to hear it. You need to hear the specific sound of it, you know, so because it drives the track. But if it's just a woolly, sharp end noise going on, you can't really tell what's happening. So here, yes, I have got some loops going here. I've got the on-beat hats, like I said before, the previous stuff that I've processed, and it sounds good. I've got a beat on top of the kick. It's ch ch ch. so it gives the kick an extra strength and drive. We've got some loops here which I've pre-made. Remember, I've had them in stock, but if you take this one for instance, which I've bounced across, you'll see that I stripped certain parts from it. I've cut away, like a regular loop would be a thick black line. You'd see all the percussive parts going on there, but I've cut away parts here. Right, you'll see here that with this loop, you'll see that I've cut sections away. Instead of it being one big driving loop taking up a lot of sound, I've just cut away the parts that I want to hear. So if you hear it in solo here, it's like it's stuttering, but it's working with, it's talking to this loop above. You hear them talking to each other. So as one's going, the other one's stopping, so they're actually creating a nice groove together. So it's not taking up too much space. And this loop here is my hi-hats. I mean, originally I would have, I'm a fan of writing in my own hi-hats. I would have got a nice drum machine written in the MIDI parts. But like I said before, I'm kind of recycling this. This is a lovely loop that, I call it a loop, but it's one that I've made. It really works in the past. It's nice and sharp. I've processed it very well, and it's basically an open hat and a closed hat working together like the classic. And this is one I've got here, and I call it max loops. The reason I call it max is because I've already maxed the processing. So it's you'll hear it here. I solo it. Got a lovely nice drive to it. You know, it really punches and drives the track. And then when you add the other loops underneath it, it gives it more of a groove, and then you've got the other percussion parts which I've made also. So to me, I didn't really want to go too further with loops, etc., because you can overdo it. You know, I still want to hear the melodies on there. There is a lot of other drums, those tom-toms, all those parts that I've showed you. So I think I'm pretty much there with the percussive parts. And here's the EQ for that specific loop channel. I'm just cutting away there. You see some rogue bottom end frequencies. You know, I don't want them there. It's just a loop. It's percussive sound. Sorry. You know, that's where the room is for the kick and the bass. Be careful again when you start doing some cuts. Make sure, you know, a lot of percussive sounds that will have some weight. You know, the mid-range, the lower end mid-range frequencies, some claps, some toms perhaps. So be careful not to go too crazy and just do a massive low-end cut, because you might be cutting away some important parts of the loop. But as I said before, I've pre-processed this. I would have done that. I would have cut away some mid-range. But here, I felt there was a few little sort of loose frequencies which were bouncing up and down, so I just wanted to get rid of them and cut them away. And also with the loops here, I felt because there is a clap, a snare within that loop, and I just felt it wasn't cutting across enough. It was everything I tried to do with the EQ. It was not sounding good, and it was damaging what I wanted to achieve. So I just laid an extra little clap on top, just so it can cut across. And that's what I've done here. Again, it's a bit of Fleming recycling. It's a clap which is proven, tested, which I've used on a few tracks. It just works. I spent a lot of time making it, processing it, and I've recycled it again on this track, and here it is. I didn't need to do any further processing on this track. It just seemed to sit in there perfectly. I checked the key. It was in the correct key. It wasn't kind of signalling any specific key, and it just seemed to sit in there perfectly. Sometimes it's a fluke and it works. Other times you might sit in there, it just won't fit. You'll have to do a little bit of processing to make it fit in there. Lucky fluke. Perhaps it's because it's the way that I work and the way I engineer. Because I work that way, naturally things are just going to sit in place. But it doesn't always happen that way. So there's the extra clap just sitting on top. It's quite a low level on top there. And it's sitting on top of the loop, which just gives it that extra little dynamic thrash of the top of the clap. And I think that's an important part of the track. A good snare clap on top really drives the track along. Those beats, it makes it just sound really, really powerful and drives along. Okay, so now I've got everything working very well. I've got the beats, the kick, the bass, the melody is sitting really nicely on top. I think it's important, which a lot of producers make this mistake. I was guilty in my early days. When you make all these bits, you usually kind of make a 16-bar loop of a track, and then you just cut and paste and put all those bits and make the arrangement of the track. But it's also important not to clutter the track. See what I've done here, these are all the rhythmic parts which I showed you with those drums, you know, they're all talking to each other. You'll see here, here's the first drop, and then it comes into the track where the melody comes in. And you'll see here, I've dropped away all those rhythmic parts while the melody's playing. I don't think it's necessary to have those extra parts. They're all taking up space. They're all doing something, taking up a dynamic range within the track. So it's important to remember to cut things, mute things. You know, when a melody comes in, mute certain parts of the track. You need room for that melody to come across. That's the strong part of the track. So I found here, by muting all those rhythmic parts, it was buying me that extra space for the main melody to come across, which is so important. You know, they're a very good part, and my old days I would have left them in because I spent so much time making them. I want them going through the whole track. It's important, but you don't miss them. You know, you'll probably notice within a lot of tracks that certain things disappear and come back. When you actually start listening, that's what they're actually doing. You've got to buy space for when things come in and out. So I sacrificed those parts, even though they're so good, but they come back in later. You know, you see here's a section here near the end, when everything is calmed down, put those rhythm parts back in again. It brings back the groove of the track. People won't miss it. You know, you really think you've got to hang on to everything, but you've heard it in the intro of the track. You've kind of got into the groove, but your mind is then taken over by the melody. Your brain's so focused on the melody, you've forgotten about those rhythmic parts. So don't worry about it. Mute them. You know, people won't miss them because other people's brains are focused somewhere else. So I think that's an important thing. You know, go for a track if you feel it's too busy. There's too much going on. Be really hard on yourself. Just start muting things as well. If you mute it and you can't hear it and you don't miss it, keep it muted. You know, if you mute it, dynamically something changes, something missing, the drive of the track's gone, that's an important part, so keep it in. So be really harsh on yourself, you know, just go muting stuff at your main part of your track. You don't miss it, keep it muted for that section, bring it back in later. I think that's so important. And it's always this big battle that you're playing when you're putting a track together. You think of an EQ range, frequency range, there's not a lot of space to play with. You know, all this stuff's taking up big expensive parts of your frequency range, so it's important. If you don't need it, calm it down. And also another little trick which I do is with your automation, if you've got some sounds which sound so good with this lush reverb, again, reverbs take up so much space. If the melody comes in, I quite often write automation to calm down those reverbs, to pretty much switch off the reverb when the melody's going on. So the same sound's going, but I've calmed down the reverb while it's the main riff's going. When the riff's finished, automation, the reverbs come back up on that sound, and you just bought yourself some space. So little tricks like that, which I did throughout this track as well. So very, very important. Myself and the Digital Blonde are famous for our pads. We love pads. It's an important feature for us in tracks. We had a little bit of difficulty with this track because the main Oxygen melody is made up of various sections which sound like pad sounds as well. So if you add an extra layer of pads, you're just going to mask the main melody, which is something that we don't want to do. So we managed to get the pads in. We had to get pads in, otherwise a song's not complete without pads. We've got the middle 8 section, which is like a brassy trumpet sound, which is from the original. So we put all our lush pads over this section. We managed to get away some secret ones near the end as well, but here you'll see this is where we save the pad moment. Again, I've done my famous layering. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers of pads to make them nice, big. You've got different sections of layer. You've got the big, thick, wide pads, then you've got some kind of choir ones. You've got some sort of brassy kind of sounding ones as well. And again, it's just making them all fit together. Luckily, the trumpet sound is such a tight, brassy sound. There's plenty of space to play with. So that was an ideal point to put the pads. And then naturally, that fitted there. And we were trying to put them with the main melody, and it just didn't work. Again, when you're making a track, it's all about experimenting. You know, you do have a picture in your head of how you want it to happen, but it doesn't always pan out that way. So, you know, I really wanted to put the pads in with the Oxygen melody, but tried, it didn't happen. So you just have to think ahead, think, okay, if you want some kind of pads in there, where can I put them? And again, I put them in the middle 8 section there, and it worked out perfectly. So that's where we got our magic blonde and Fleming sounding pads. So here you see all the different layers of pads. So this is the first layer. Here it's you'll probably be familiar with myself and blonde. This is our favourite pad sounding. This came from the ES2 actually, which is fantastic for making pads. We go to the next up. It's kind of in a similar way that I was showing you with the Oxygen Melody, how we lay the pads on top of each other. You hear there's more of a glassy sounding pad, because the other ones were very rich sounding. I tailed off the top end of the EQ to give room for this more glassy sounding, so the layer would work on top of each other. And the pads then progress. As I've named them here, the Omnisphere, which is fantastic for pads. You hear a nice lower tone, some depth, lower tone, a graininess to them. So that we heard from the first two layers, we had some glassy sounding ones, we had very rich wide sounding. Now we've got that nice grainy sounding, which we had space for. It's more kind of natural sounding. Here we go, more kind of natural, as if it's from an orchestra, sounding very, very nice again from the Omnisphere. And then the choirs, which will sit on top when it catches up. There they go. Let's wake it up. So it's like this is a boys' choir, which is you can't beat choirs in a trance track. It wouldn't be a trance track if there was no choirs in there. Yeah, you got to get your hands in the air. So then the choirs just seem to naturally sit on top of pads. So then we've got it's not from the original actually, and we just felt the track needed a little section in there to give a little nod to trance. This part is written by us, it's not in the original, and we just thought just added a little bit of something in the middle of it to take you away. You get your heads down, it's an aggressive acid kind of sounding moment, then it goes back into the Oxygen Melody, so it's kind of, your head's down moment, you think, oh yes, it's kind of remembering, this is a trance track, this is like serious stuff, and then it goes back into the melody, so it's kind of like the darkness, and then the other side is the light, which I like playing with ideas like that. Many of the tracks you'll hear, we have a real mad dark moment, but then on the other side you're going to get your bright candy, so it's messing with your mind. That's how I make music for a dance floor, and the dance floor out there, I want to play with people's heads, and this is what we had to achieve in this track, just had one of those little moments in there. So again, it's another more Fleming layers. I don't always do layers, but this track particularly has to be full of layers, but they just work. And there's some nice 303 sounding moments in there, and there's also some aggressive sound which I've made by putting stuff through, like a guitar amp distortion, something like that. Just gives it a little bit of nastiness. There's no melodies playing, there's no strings, so there's plenty of room to play with. You just got the kick bass percussion, and you've got this massive amount of middle room which you can put these aggressive sounds in, which I've done here, which you'll hear. There they all are, all working together. There's the 303 growing, it's doing various filter changes. There's a nasty kind of guitar sounding thing, it's just middle area, it's just punching away, driving like mad. What I often do, which I've actually done with these sounds, I'll bust them to their own separate channels, just so I've got a little bit more control over the sounds together, because quite often when you've got some layers and sounds going together, if you want to adjust one or the whole lot, rather than having to go through each one individually, if you bust them to one channel, you can adjust the volume, and you can also control EQs, compression, etc. You've got more control over the one sound. It's pretty rare I didn't do it on this one. I think it's because it originally came from the project from Ricky, I usually have a lot of these auxiliary channels with the separate buses, so I've got control over certain sections of the track, the kick, the bass, the percussion, the pads. Again, it's just every way you work differently. And then, I could just tailor-make the EQ, just if something's not quite sitting there, I can just adjust the EQ to make it sit properly with the pads, make the pads sit in better with the rest of the track. I've only done 4 of them here. I don't even know, I've got the pads on one channel. You can see I've done a little EQ cut on the pads. Must have been a bit of mid-range frequency in the centre there, which was annoying. It must have been clashing with something else. I can't remember why I did that, but you see I cut away the bottom end. I don't want the bottom end of the pads there, and a little bit at the top end to give the percussion a place to breathe. But that's generally what I do. But every track's completely different, for every reason you make it a different way. I think this one took a year to make, so it's progressed from an old version to another version of Logic, a computer change, so just kind of stuck in the old way that'll work. So, but you'll get the idea from me explaining it. And I've just kind of zoomed out so you can see the arrangement of the track. I think it's so important to be organised. There's so many producers that I've worked with, and their arrangements are just a mess. Nothing's labelled. By looking at the screen, you can't tell what's going on where. And I think we got the luxury with many producers now, like I've gone this way, is working inside the computer. You've got the luxury of adding a new channel. Even if it's just a little zap sound, you can give it his own channel and his own EQ. So you end up here, I'm just looking here, there's 83 channels of audio. I mean, and it's a lot. So by labelling and colouring things instantly, I can tell what's happening, when it's happening, and putting them in its own sections. Like here, there's the percussive sounds. Here I've got the more of the percussion, more like the hi-hats, etc. You can see the kick and the bass, all the leads, the pads, some more details, and all the atmospheres. They're all detailed, they're all sections into their groups. So I can instantly tell just by looking at the track where something is, or where something is that shouldn't be, when it's playing, when it's not. It just makes your life so much easier being organised. Especially now, I haven't opened this project for a couple of months, and instantly I can tell where everything is. We would be on here for hours and hours if it wasn't labelled. I can just instantly, because in the real world, this is what happens. You might work on a project, you get sidetracked by another project, for 3 months, and you have to come back to this one. When you open it up, you're sitting there scratching your head for like a day or 2 days trying to figure out where stuff is or what it is. It'll just save you no end of time if just get in a habit. As you make a sound, name the channel, name the part, and colour it. Get in that zone. It's going to make your life so much easier. Generally, the general rule of thumb, as I'm mixing everything as I'm going along, as I showed you, making sure that everything sits together, and I mix it to the best ability that I can. I have done my own final mix down, my own mastering in the past, but I generally find I'm a writer, I'm a producer that creates music, I write music, and within any industry, you get specialists within a certain industry. Just say like Formula 1 racing team, for example, you've got someone that specialises in making the engine, tuning the engine, you get someone that specialises in the tyres, you get the driver. You get all these different parts which make the machine happen. I'm a writer, and I really think I'm a writer and an engineer, and that's probably two of the hardest points of any part of the production. And too many people get sidetracked with the geekiness of having the latest plug-in, the detailing this slightest little hi-hat, etc., and they're forgetting the main thing, that you need to be able to write music. They're completely disassociated with making track. You just listen to them, you see them on forums just chatting about, I've got the latest blah blah, this frequency does that, a new operating system comes out, they've got it, a new version of the software comes out, they've got it. They're forgetting the main thing. You need to be able to write music, and generally most of these people can't. But those geeky people happen to be good mastering people. They sit in a mastering studio day in, day out, mastering tracks. They take finished tracks, they just do the final tweaks and add a little bit of magical dust at the end. I'm not a mastering guy. I haven't been trained to be a mastering guy. I don't aspire to be a mastering guy. I love writing stuff. Like this project here, that's what I'm good at. And generally I'll take the final bounce and take it to a mastering studio and let the guy do the final details, because I'm not confident about doing it. I don't understand it, but these guys do it day in, day out. They're cross-referencing tracks day out. They do that for a living, and it's a reason why they have a separate career doing that, because this is what they do and understand. And again, the danger is, yes, with software, you get these magical mastering tools. You get this great software, which say you can master your tracks. It'll put a sparkle on it, but the danger is you can do more damage than good. They have all these presets, but they're preset for a certain track. You know, that certain track needed something cut at this frequency. It needed something boosted. It needed it. It doesn't mean to say it's going to fit in your track, because we all work different ways. You know, and I think that's the danger of this software, where they believe it can be mastered for you. I don't believe it can. And when I put these presets on tracks before, it just makes the track sound awful. A mastering guy will instantly hear where the track needs a little bit of detail, where it needs boosting, where it needs a little bit of cutting. And the danger is, when you've been working on a track so long, your ears get used to it, and you start to think that stuff is good when it's not. So you just get used to it sounding that way. But going to an individual person with fresh ears, with fresh frequency, instantly everything will jump out to him, and he'll say, right, this needs doing, you know, and he'll tidy the track up. And I think that's a good part of sending to a mastering place. You know, at least, you know, it'll come back. And again, you can, you know, if he's overdone certain elements of the track, you can always send it back. So I didn't quite want it with those dynamics. But I think the important thing is, when you send something to a mastering studio, give him some other tracks to cross-reference to that you like the sound of. Give him as much information as you can. You know, how you want the track to sound, what feel you're after, and hopefully, if he's a good guy, it'll come back and it'll be exactly how you want it. I think another mistake people make is, I'm going to blame Mr. Digital Blonde for this, because he's going to kill me watching it. But I used to do it for many years, not realising. You think, if a sound doesn't work, turn it up. It's always a thing in your head, turn it up. You know, if it's not sitting in, turn the sound up, which is completely wrong. What you end up with is a track, all the channels are peaking out in the red. If it's going in red, it means it's starting to distort. It's peaking at its top range of the volume range. So you're going to start doing damage to the sound. So it's important, like in this track, if I play it, you know what? All the levels are low. Nothing's peaking. Nothing's going in the red. Keep your master out of the red as well. You'll see everything. Here's the master at the end there. Everything's at a good level. The more you do this, the more your track's going to sound great. I've just seen it happen so many times. People you turn one thing up, then you can't hear another. They're turning another thing up. Eventually the levels are just going so high. You see all the channels peaking in the red. That red means danger. You're peaking out channels in, you know, some top end frequency. Your ear might not be able to hear them, but they'll be distorting, and it'll damage the sound of the track. So always try and keep an eye on those levels. You know, if you can't hear the track for a reason, don't just grab for the volume. You know, try the EQ. Try boosting just a certain frequency that you want to hear. Don't, you know, turn the volume of the whole thing. Boost something up. Or probably more important, before you reach for a boost, is cut something else. Listen, something might be covering that sound that you want to hear, so have a listen to it very carefully. That's what I generally aim for first, is look around, see what other sounds are playing at the same time. Do some cuts at the frequency range where the other one's trying to come through, and quite often that'll fix it, so you haven't had to turn anything up. So try the cuts first, and do the boost as the second option. But generally, if you can't hear something, don't turn it up. Thanks for joining me in the creation of our remake of Oxygen. I hope I've made some sense to you and I haven't waffled on too much. I did try not to get too technical and lose you and speak in layman's terms. I think the important thing is, what I've learned from the past is, it's your confidence. No artist in this world has his confidence. You know, it's a difficult thing. You've got to start believing in yourself. Believe it or not, I'm very an unconfident person, but it's through tutorials like this, reading magazines like this, where I've learnt my skill. And it's just so important to stick with it. Yes, you're going to make mistakes, make those mistakes, but don't get put off. Don't want to give up, throw the towel in, thinking, oh, I'm never going to be able to do this. Why does someone's track sound bright and crisp and mine sounds awful? But it's a learning process, and it takes time. So go with it. Don't give up. Learn those mistakes. learn from them, and good will come from it. You know, where are we now? How long have I been producing? 16 years, and you know, good part of those early parts of my production was learning, and I only feel more confident now. And it still every day I'm learning new things, and it's amazing from these exact tutorials what I learn myself. So yes, it's important. Hopefully you've learned a lot from this, and you know, keep rewinding, keep going back through it, and practice. But you will get it. The penny will drop, and it's a wonderful feeling when that penny drops each and every stage. You know, even a silly little thing like making the kick and the bass to sit together, how to make a sound properly on a synthesizer. It's such a wonderful feeling at the other side. Then you look back and you realise why your track was going wrong. So you know, all these little things that you can't do, you will learn. There will be a point where you'll learn something. Oh, thank God for that. My track sounds wonderful now. That's why it was sounding muddy. This is why it was sounding terrible. And it all does come together eventually. So stick with it. You'll have fun doing it.